In this episode, I'm talking to Dr. Nicholas Zeppos, Chancellor Emeritus and University Distinguished Professor of Law and Political Science, Emeritus at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Zeppos shares his take on the most pressing challenges facing higher education, like affordability and access, public perception of higher education's value, and navigating the immense social, political, and financial pressures facing higher education. He also shares new opportunities to address these issues that higher ed leaders should consider, like AI technologies, data analytics, and good old-fashioned community engagement. And in this sometimes daunting and uncertain time, he shares some concrete actions that leaders can take to get started. Dr. Nicholas Zeppos served as Chancellor at Vanderbilt University from 2008 to 2019. He led a number of strategic transformations in student success, residential life, and academic medicine. He continues to serve Vanderbilt University in a number of ways, including teaching in the law school and the Department of Political Science. But before we dive into my conversation with Dr. Zeppos, take a moment to subscribe to the show to stay up to date on the latest in data-informed approaches to student success. Dr. Zeppos, welcome to Next Practices. Thank you for joining us to share how your work to help students succeed in college.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and there's nothing more important than talking about our great colleges and universities and the success of our students.
Well, let's get started by talking about your university, Vanderbilt University, who it served, its mission, your role in it, and the work that you've been doing across your career to support student success.
Sure. So I've always thought of Vanderbilt as at its core, kind of a liberal arts college, that we have about 6,500 undergraduates, and they're getting a fairly traditional, somewhat exciting liberal arts experience. And then we've kind of crossbred that with a large research university. And so we do, particularly with our affiliated medical center, we do about $1 billion of research. And so, we're a large research university, but we really try to have the undergraduates have a meaningful community engaged experience.
It's an interesting way that you describe Vanderbilt as a liberal art, as like a hybrid institution, a liberal arts institution, with a research institution, because I think that it's so, that's what an institution can be, and every institution is has its own identity and its own combination of things that it's working for, and its own experience that it gives students. And I think sometimes we paint institutions with a broad brush, but really they're all so very unique and different from one another with some shared experiences.
Yeah, if you've seen one university, you've seen one university. It's interesting. I think when young people go on a college campus, they can get a vibe on a tour that sometimes we adults don't get. So every school has its kind of unique qualities. I've been at Vanderbilt now for almost 40 years, 38 years. I've held every job except football coach. And so I'm glad I didn't have to do that. My focus at Vanderbilt, I think, uh, primarily was on first the accessibility of college. And I think we can talk more about this later, but we're really going through a seismic change in the higher ed landscape. We are really dramatically resetting the models in a way that fundamentally challenges everything we do. But I think we need to make the case for access and provide the resources for access. In Vanderbilt, when I first started doing administrative work, had a fairly high loan burden, and it was really a deterrent for people to seek the Vanderbilt experience. It was frankly harming us because we weren't getting the best young people and their families looking at coming to Vanderbilt. So, wise decision I made. I think it was a week after Lehman Brothers failed, I declared that no Vanderbilt undergraduate students would leave with undergraduate debt. And so the challenge then came to be to make good on that promise, and we call it Opportunity Vanderbilt. And we went out and raised, I don't know, now it's probably $700 million for this. And it really transformed the campus, and it really transformed graduation and completion because we were losing kids who, if they were unhappy or they weren't doing well, why am I taking on all this student debt burden, a lot of pressure from families, even if they were going through tough times? Why are we taking on this burden? Because what we have to realize is when a student takes on that debt, it's really a family taking on the debt. And so we eliminated all loans, and that was a really transformative change. Um, and I think the universities tend to change slowly. This changed the Vanderbilt University pretty rapidly, and I noticed they were really a little bit out of sync with what we were teaching, what our student services were, what our career services were, and so we really had kind of catch up to do. But accessibility and affordability and college completion and really setting the student up for success, whether it be graduate school or employment or not-for-profit work, those are really my goals, Katie.
Yeah. I think setting the student up for success is so multifaceted. And for so long, it's been about just getting through the experience to the degree as quickly as possible, just like getting students to the degree. And there's so much more to the college experience beyond the degree that they need to be successful. It's about preparing young people to be ready to go into the profession that they wanna go into the goal that they wanna go into, be prepared to go out in the world and be leaders and thought leaders and make a difference and make an impact. And I think sometimes just in an effort to, drive those completion on-time completion metrics or drive those retention metrics, we can lose sight of that a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that, if you look at someone coming to college or age 17 and 18, you look at when they graduate, age 21, 22, whatever, those are really major years of psychological, emotional, and social development. And so we always talked about educating the whole student. How do you, particularly when a student's spending 14 hours, 15 hours in the classroom, how do you create a suite of activities, services, and other support mechanisms around that student to go from I'm going to graduate to I'm thriving at Vanderbilt. And because I'm thriving, I'm happy, I'm engaged, I'm going to be prepared to go out and do other things. Clearly, when kids apply to graduate school or they go out and look for jobs, they're presenting themselves as a whole person. And it's really important to prepare these students by focusing on their psychological, emotional, social, in addition to their academic development, and to make sure that they're thriving. I mean, you're investing a lot in these students through financial aid. Many families are still paying, the full tuition and room and board. And so you're investing a lot in these students with families. So you can't have the bare minimum. I want my student to graduate. I think that's great. And there are a lot of institutions that could improve fairly dramatically. But you really need to have a sense of the holistic. And that's where I was kind of a data nut when I was a chancellor, and I learned that our institution, many other institutions, collect a lot of data on student engagement, student unhappiness, student mental health, student wellness. And I really looked at those indicators to say we need to go from a model of is the student graduating to is the student thriving. And so I think in terms of making the value proposition, I think it's important for college chancellors and presidents and boards to look at themselves and look at their data and say, we're charging all this money, we're investing all this money. Are our students thriving? What are the indicators of thriving, and are our students thriving? The data is there. It's siloed and kind of hidden in servers and things like that. So I was kind of a data nut about the overall student experience, which I think you have to be in these days to prove your case.
Yeah, and I think to that point of really leveraging data, what I find when I talk to folks who are really looking at their data and not just looking at analytics that come from sort of general generic models, but looking at their data, pulling all of their data together in a way that's accessible, is that oftentimes a couple of things happen. It either validates things they knew, but they didn't have evidence, or it reveals little simple opportunities and adjustments to modernize or to innovate or to shift focus or to prioritize or connect particular populations to services that make such a big impact with such a small shift. It's something that's really accessible, doesn't require standing up a whole nother department or a whole nother initiative, doesn't have to be expensive by looking at their own data and seeing what it tells them about their students.
Yeah, I think that most universities have data, unfortunately, is hidden in various corners of the campus. And I think universities need to do a better job of saying, what are our goals with our students? And they need to be courageous and bold and forthright and say, these are the goals we have for our students. And then they need to use their data, which I don't think this requires a whole new set of data or a bunch of new surveys. I think it's probably there for the taking, but they need to set their goals and their vision, and they need to then map their data on their goals and visions, and then they need to be transparent and accountable in these days for what they're doing, Katie, because that's the name in the game these days. I mean, you know, for better, for worse, we're viewed as opaque, unaccountable, and we need to turn that around. We need to say, here are our goals. Here's our data. Here's why this is worth it. This is why a degree from Vanderbilt or any other school is well worth it.
Yeah. I think understanding what those challenges are. I know that you and I in the early conversation, you already kind of talking about it. The affordability and access is part of the issue, but there are challenges with public perception and the value of higher education. There are challenges with different political, social, and financial pressures. And I think there's a perception that, for students, like, what's the ROI on this experience? And is it worth the time, the money, the effort to get part of the way there and not get the whole degree, or to not get out and get a job in the market that I want to get into? And there's so many like perception issues. But I'd like you to talk about that. Is are those the challenges that you're seeing, or any other challenges you're seeing that are kind of causing that, like, we need to kind of reevaluate and take a good look at ourselves and what we're doing and be able to understand, what our students need and then how effective we are at delivering that?
Yeah, I think there's a dramatic reset going on right now, Katie, in all aspects of universities and colleges. Every kind of niche, whatever you want to characterize your school as, they're undergoing fundamental strains. Um, the first thing I've spent most of my time in a major research university that's a private university that's very, very well endowed. I would say that they're the most at risk right now. They're facing, particularly with the new administration, they're facing uh, dramatic cuts in research funding, if not, as you saw at Columbia recently, an outright cutting off of research funding. And so I think they're talking about taxing endowments, and this tax on endowments could be dropped and the threshold could be lowered so that many colleges and universities that might say, well, that's for the Vanderbilts and the Harvards and Stanfords and Princetons may find themselves subject to an endowment tax, which is going to be a major hit on their budget. Um, you know, I think we live in a time because of social media, because of political pressures, because of divisiveness in our society, where everything a university teaches, writes, or talks about is going to be subject to pretty high level scrutiny. And so concepts of free speech and academic freedom and what are the boundaries of that are kind of being tested. Um, and I think on every aspect of what universities and colleges are doing, they're subject to scrutiny. They're just subject to financial, political, and economic scrutiny, academic scrutiny. Um, to add to all this, we're going through an enrollment cliff. The number of high school students is actually dropping. And, that might not affect some of the most high demand wealthiest institutions. They're going to have to deal with endowment taxes and cuts in federal funding, though. They're not immune. But a lot of universities and colleges are dealing with an enrollment cliff. And so the model of discounting tuition to get students to come, that's kind of, I think, run its course. It's not really going to be a viable model for some colleges and universities. And you're actually seeing some colleges fail and go bankrupt. I'm surprised there are more of them. I think that could accelerate over time. Um, and then finally, I think there's I used to joke, I didn't go to business school, but I know you can't grow your expenses faster than your revenues. That's not a long-term solution. And I think a lot of the expense side on staff and healthcare benefits are growing a lot faster than the revenue. And this gets us back to, it's not like you can increase enrollment. There's an enrollment cliff here. It's not like you can cut back on your discounts. People, you've got to, draw students to your campus. And so I would say the political environment is terrible. We have an enrollment cliff coming, and the financial model of higher education is really out of whack. The expenses keep growing faster than their revenues, and there's no real hope that their revenues are going to increase. And so I think you have all these stressors that are hitting the 3,000 colleges and universities around the country, and they're going to have to find a fairly dramatic new way forward. And obviously, the administration is testing them, but I think these were probably more secular trends in my time that I saw that were going to play out regardless of who was president.
Yeah. I think there's been some these these issues. We've been talking about some of these issues for a long time. The whole time I've been in higher ed, which is 15 years, that they're coming. I think that the enrollment cliff is coming. The financial pressure of college is coming. It is in the future, and I think the future is now. Um, I know that there's a lot of change and uncertainty and really big wicked problems that you just mentioned. But I also know that you see a lot of opportunities for higher education leaders to start to address some of these challenges and start to think differently and to start to reevaluate the approach. Um, how do you think leaders can start to shift and start to think differently about the value higher ed offers?
Yeah, I think first of all, and I'm not sure we've done a really, really good job on that, or maybe people weren't listening, or maybe people really didn't want to hear. But it's not like everyone's going to go to college. I totally get that, but a claim that college doesn't improve the outcomes in life is just flatly wrong. And I think we've been too silent as university leadership in not making that case. I think we've also made the mistake of not having our boards and our faculty and our students aligned on that issue. And I'm particularly worried now that um, college presidents and boards are going to be so outwardly focused that they're going to miss this necessary alignment that has to occur on the value proposition. And so I think that you've got to really, really make that case. You've got to make that case internally and get alignment. The other thing that I think, secondly, is you've got to make that case externally. Um, I used to I was really surprised, and I'd been the provost, so it wasn't like I hadn't been around. I was really surprised how much time I spent and how much I enjoyed being with external constituencies and talking about the impact that we had on young people. And so I think college presidents and universities and boards need to get out and talk to their members of Congress, their senators, their governor, their mayor, their city council, their local city council member, and make the case for what they're doing because they're living in a social media soundbite world. They're hearing, oh, it's not worth it to go to college. It's not worth it to spend the money on tuition. It's unaffordable. I mean, when I would go to really inform members of Congress, and I would say, going to Vanderbilt is cheaper than going to a state school. They're like, that's not true. And I was like, no, it's true. It's here's the data. Here's data that shows this. And these are really sophisticated, smart, engaged people who are holding public office. And I thought, God, what a failure I am. I just assumed that everyone knew how good our financial aid plan was. So I think we've missed a huge opportunity. And you've got to get to your state capital. You've got to get to your mayor's office. You've got to get to your city council. And you've got to get to Washington, D.C. and make the case. So you've got to make the case internally. You've got to make the case externally. You've got to kind of be much, much more engaged on the value proposition and much more widely. We can't think of it as, well, it's my alumni and my students. They're important to make the case, but you've got to say it's the sidewalk alumni. It's the people in the street who don't go to my school who need to hear about what we're doing. Um, I think that the university needs to make sure that it opens its doors and its books to everyone who's interested. I think that transparency on our financials and explaining our financials is very, very hard. But I think we've got to show how the numbers work at our university because people just don't believe. Um, Again, I've talked to members of Congress who think an endowment is just a big slush run. They don't understand most of it is restricted as to its purpose. So I think you've got to advocate externally. You've got to advocate externally, internally. You've got to get alignment. Um, but I just want to emphasize again, you can't be the chancellor externally only. I think there's a sense of a divide happening on our campuses where college presidents, chancellors are pulled so much externally that they're not spending enough time. I used to try to have, dinner with faculty 2 or 3 times a week, just to what's on your mind and what's going on, to stay connected to students. Um, so I think advocating, getting beyond your bubble, but getting alignment on the campus. And then I really think there's gotta be a solution to the cost curve in college education. I mean, costs going up, revenue going like that, that's not a good model. That's not a good model. I was recently in a conversation where we talked about, could artificial intelligence really bend the cost curve in a lot of the overhead expenditures in higher education? And um, we're this is something that's going to be looked at very, very seriously. But um, I think that we've got to figure out a way to control the costs and not degrade the product. And I think there's been a lot of proliferation of offices and staff. I think there's a tremendous amount of overregulation of higher education. I did a study that showed about 10% of our revenue goes to regulation. And so I think there are ways to really look at the cost structure and get those in alignment and really then try to curb the control the increase in the cost of education.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're it's so important that people just don't get siloed and in their bubble and just do things the same way because that's the way they've always been done. Like it's really about getting out there and having conversations and alleviating misconceptions, not taking for granted that people understand or know. Um, often private education does provide a large amount of financial aid that offsets the cost compared to public institutions. There's so much inside baseball, I think, in higher ed.
Oh,
It's like its own
it's
specific
like
world.
it's like it's like a medieval secret society or something
Yeah.
like that with its own nomenclature, its own verbiage, its own rituals, its own traditions. And we've got to throw the doors open. We've got to kind of be more transparent, and we've got to show that we're listening. We've got to show that we're listening. but we can't back off that value proposition. I worry that people say, "You don't need to go to college," and sometimes
Mhm.
that's coming from people who are very successful who went to college, and I wanna say, "Shame on you. Shame on you."
Yeah, I think the data is pretty clear that
Oh,
you have a
it's
better life outcome if you go to college.
there's no question. There's no question. No
Yeah,
question about that.
yeah. Well, I think, we've talked about so much, like, advocating for the institution and for higher ed in general and really emphasizing that value proposition. I think getting out there, communicating with a variety of people, both internal and external to the institution, and making sure that they understand that we're in relationship, that we're not just, yelling into the void, what the higher ed is valuable, but that we're actually having really meaningful conversations with a variety of folks. And then the other that we talked about earlier is strategically using data to provide insights and figure out how to better serve communities. You were talking about that earlier in our conversation. Is there anything else there that you want to share as far as an opportunity to address some of the challenges we've been talking about?
Well, I think that, one obvious thing, and we used to do it all the time, was a kind of an economic impact statement that, and you're seeing this now when some of these small colleges close, Katie, where there was an article recently, I don't know where it was, but it was what happens when the college closes in your small town.
Mhm.
And it's similar to when the hospital closes. It's like that's the major place where people work. So always uh, making our case, always making our case for our economic impact because we do enjoy the privilege of tax exempt status. Hopefully that'll continue. Um, I think another way is just getting out in the community with your faculty, staff, and students to learn about your local community and engage them on their own terms. And I used to do something called the Saturday Road Scholars. And, I don't know, once a month, we'd get a busload of faculty, staff, and students, and we go to a part of the city that's, it could be a mile and a half from Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt has no relationship with it.
Yeah.
So, or we would, Nashville was having a major influx of refugees who were being resettled. Well, it's great if, a child from that community gets admitted to Vanderbilt and, that we certainly brag about that, but how proximate were we really to the challenges and problems and opportunities with the refugee community? Were my HR people reaching out to them to seek employment opportunities? Were my language departments working with them on integration into Nashville, English as a second language? And so I think you've got to actually physically present yourself in these communities in all your constituents and find ways to listen. Listening is very, very important, and then be part of the solution.
Yeah, but you're not
So,
you're
yeah, we were, when Nashville had a problem, I was kind of always like, well, how do I help? How do I help? If it's transit, how do we help? If it's healthcare, how do we help? I mean, those are things that affect so many people in the community. And it's not enough to say, oh, Vanderbilt's a great university and it supports a lot of the community. It's got to be more engaged and proximate to the real problems people face.
yeah, it's not just being the beacon on the hill where people can go to get an education. It's about using that research, those resources, the and being a force for good in the community.
Yeah, our students, there's a real kind of ethic of community engagement at Vanderbilt. And our students and faculty and staff are really kind of engaged in the community. And whether it's food deserts or childhood health, we're really, really engaged in the community. The other thing that I would say is, and I would do this is don't be afraid to call people in your office from the community who might disagree with you. Try to realize that people who are criticizing you, they're well-intentioned people. They're not bad people. And if they're criticizing you, maybe if you learn from if you talk to them, you can learn from them, correct a misperception, or even if you can't find an agreement, you've personalized a an institutional conflict into something that's more relationship based. And I used to joke I would meet with a lot of different people who might be critical of Vanderbilt, and they had no real affiliation with the university, and just coming across as a normal, not a jerk academic pointy head, you know, was something that I was approaching. Be approachable, be a listener, don't be arrogant, don't be condescending.
Yeah. Don't walk in and act like you're smarter than everybody else.
Absolutely. Or that you're doing a perfect job in everyone's mind.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about so many things, and there's so much, all this change and uncertainty. I know it can feel daunting. Where do you recommend? You've given so many recommendations already, but where do you recommend if leaders are going to do one thing to get rolling, get started on this? Where do you recommend they start?
Um, I'm gonna give two kind of very different responses. The first thing is I would do a full-blown kind of audit with my kind of marketing and communications and community relations people about how connected are we really to the ordinary people in our community and opinion leaders, and am I meeting with them? And if some of these people believe college isn't worth it, why aren't I meeting with them? So the first thing would be an engagement strategy and then the second thing would be start to look at things like artificial intelligence to bend this cost curve. I mean, something really kind of wonky. More schools are going to fail, Katie, and many schools are drawing too much money from their endowment so that, and they're going to run out of money. And so find a way to be the school that does it differently. Find a way to say, you know, I can only grow revenue at 2% a year, but I've found a way to actually reduce my costs of doing business by using new technologies, and nothing frustrated me more than I put in a new software system and they hired 10 more people. I mean, how can that be? I mean, where are the efficiencies that came? And so I think that unless that cost curve is bent, we're in for some hundreds of institutions and are in for some really, really tough times. It's not going to be easy for anybody. But those are the two things I'd say. What's your engagement strategy with opinion leaders and politicians? And then what's your solution for the cost curve?
Yeah. I think those are really accessible, quick places to start. I mean, I know that they're daunting and they require a lot of work, but really important way to think about it. We've talked about so much and covered so much ground. Is there anything that we didn't get to touch on or didn't ask about that you want to
Yeah,
share?
yeah. The only thing I would say is I think we're at an existential moment, Katie. I really do think that unless we get on some of these public perception, we're going through an inflection point one way or the other. But to come out the other side as healthy as possible, uh, I think we've got to get on these cost curve issues and on these kind of relationship issues, or we're just going to be, even if we come through this somewhat damage, we're going to be playing defense for a long time. The public perceptions of universities and colleges is really quite grim, and we need to turn that around. But it's existential.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on Next Practices. I
Okay,
really
well, it's my
appreciate your
privilege.
time.
Good luck to everyone.